welcome to, and the winner is, Analyzing the 2012 Election. My name is Jared Loggins. I'm a sophomore political science major from Memphis, Tennessee. Currently, I serve as an associate editor for the Maroon Tiger and co-writer of House, a fact-checking column in the Maroon Tiger.
And my name is Darren Wesley Martin Jr. I am currently a sophomore English major. I am the associate opinions editor of the Maroon Tiger, and I am also a co-founder of House.
On the heels of a recent historical election, tonight's event has come at a most opportune time.
It is indeed important to discuss what the winning and losing factors were, and how the changing demographics of the American electorate undoubtedly impact this presidential race and the future elections.
This is why Morehouse College and Syracuse University have teamed up to present to you a dynamic group of panelists who have come from a diverse journalistic and academic backgrounds and are ready to discuss the important issues.
But first, we would like to introduce our great MC for the night, Angela Robinson. Ms. Robinson is a veteran broadcast journalist and president and chief executive officer of the full-service media company ARC Media LLC. She is also currently host and executive producer of the award-winning news and public affairs talk show In Contact, a first-of-its-kind program produced by the Atlanta Association of Black Journalists. Airing on PBS station WPBA, In Contact is Atlanta's only news and public affairs talk show covering topics from African-American perspectives.
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Ms. Angela Robinson.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good evening. One more time, good evening. Can we give these fabulous Morehouse men another big round of applause? It is such an honor to be on this campus, in this sacred place, and it's such a joy and an honor to have two powerful institutions come together. Dr. Franklin knows where we come from. With my Baptist background, when we have a monumental time like this, we say amen. So let the church say amen. 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 Thank you. I am a proud native of this great city, great legacy of family at Morehouse College. Dated a few Morehouse men, kicked them to the curb. No, different talk show. But I'm also a very proud graduate of the Samuel I. Newhouse Public School of Communication at Syracuse University. Thunderous applause. We are so very excited about this opportunity to analyze the election, to look at what's ahead, and to see how we all fit in. Without further ado, before I bring up the president of this great college, and I don't think he would mind if I took this liberty, that we've all come across the waters in different ways, but we're still here and we got here. And I was always raised when you see an icon and when sacred is happening before you, people who died, took a bullet, took a hose, got locked up, beat up, bombed, you need to say thank you. One of the reasons we all get to be together. One of those civil rights leaders with us today. He is a dear friend, and he knows how to move a mountain. Please welcome Reverend C.T. Vivian, if he would just stand, and we can give thanks to him. Thank you, Reverend Vivian. We are so honored to be in your space and in your presence. Thank you for being here. Without question, he is a Morehouse man. The Reverend Dr. Robert M. Franklin is the 10th president of Morehouse College. He's a short timer. He's getting ready to retire and do his next great adventure. He'll be leaving at the end of the year, but we're so glad that we've got this moment with him. He is a dear friend to bring greetings and to welcome you to his house. President of Morehouse College, Dr. Robert Franklin.
Thank you, Angela Robinson. You are one of the towering luminaries in media, culture, and community activism for Atlanta, and we are especially appreciative that you are providing leadership as a moderator tonight. Also very grateful to acknowledge, as you did, the Reverend C.T. Martin, who along with young Martin Luther King Jr., I'm sorry, C.T. Vivian. There is a C.T. Martin who is a member of the city council, and so Dr. Vivian's calling was higher, and so we are. And so we honor you, Dr. Vivian. You're always welcome in this college. I welcome you to Morehouse College, the place that has produced Renaissance men with social conscience and global perspective for 145 years. And it's my special pleasure to focus this evening's attention on the recent election. I'd like to give special thanks to Morehouse and Syracuse University teams led by our own Ron Thomas of the Morehouse College Journalism and Sports Program, and the Honorable Dean Lorraine Branham, Dean of the School of Public Communications at Syracuse. They have worked diligently to bring us this program tonight. And Angela, I note the juxtaposition of these two wonderful college icons perhaps suggests there's time for a basketball rivalry as well. But another program. I'd also like to thank the very capable professors, our political science professor Hasan Crockett and Dr. Grant Reeher, respectively, from both institutions. And many thanks to some of the nation's most prolific journalists and thought leaders. Corey Dade, NPR Digital News, Bryan Moore of CNNPolitics.com, and Atlanta's daughter, Cynthia Tucker, and of course, Angela Robinson. We're delighted that you are here. About a week ago, we were waiting with bated breath for the results of an election. All of us prepared to stay up all night, hoping it would not last a week or more. And so we were thrilled with the short turnaround response. Let me say no more. This is a 501c3 institution and a nonpartisan nonprofit. But I will say that I was very proud to see this generation of young men whom you've heard tonight standing in line, long lines, to vote in our college gym. And I thought, as I heard and will hear tonight, the response and what was different from 4 years ago, and many of us were worried about the response of college students. I was certainly proud as I walked across this campus and saw those young men queued up, ready to vote, and prepared to go out into the community to knock on doors. Indeed, a group of students from Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta, knocked on over 10,000 doors that day to mobilize the vote in a nonpartisan way. So thank you to the students. We look forward to the insights that will be shared tonight. Without further ado, I welcome and ask Angela to return. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Franklin. Since 2008, the Dean of the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University has focused on developing professional partnerships in an effort to address the issues raised by a rapidly changing media industry. She's made history on that campus. I'm so glad she talked to Ron and they got together and said, we need to partner and do this. It is a joy. She is my dean. Please welcome the Dean of the Samuel I. Newhouse School of Communications at Syracuse University, Dean Lorraine Branham. Madam Dean.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you all for being here tonight. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here with you in Atlanta. If I weren't here with you, I'd be home freezing in Syracuse, so it's much nicer to be here. And I really do appreciate the weather, but I also appreciate all of you coming out for this really important event. I'd like to thank our hosts, Morehouse College, and its president, Dr. Franklin. We really appreciate your hospitality as well as your collaboration with us on this. This was a really not an easy thing to do, but it is indeed a historic undertaking, and we are so appreciative of your willingness to partner with us and to try to make this happen. I'd also like to thank somebody who's not here today, and that's my chancellor, Dr. Nancy Cantor, who deserves some credit for this happening because she has encouraged us to seek out collaborations and partnerships and to expand our educational horizons. And I might never have undertaken this project if I did not know that my university would be so supportive of this undertaking. We at Syracuse have created a culture where we are not just supported but also encouraged to go out and do these kinds of things, and I think that's a wonderful thing. You might imagine that this was not easy to do, and it has been months in the making. There's been a lot of talk over the last few weeks about this analysis, but we've been working and thinking about how we were going to pull this off for months. When Morehouse journalism professor Ron Thomas first came to me months ago, back in June, and said this would be a great thing for Syracuse and Morehouse to do together, I was excited about it. But I was also worried about whether or not we could actually make something like this happen, being 900 miles apart. It's not an easy thing to do. We had lots of challenges, but I knew it was an important thing to do. So you are really part of history today, but I hope it's not the end of the history making, because I think these are the kinds of things that universities need to be doing. We need to have these kinds of collaborations. I think they strengthen institutions, and I also think they benefit our students. So we're really excited about taking a part of this, but also looking ahead to future collaborations that we might do. There are a few people I need to thank before I sit down and we can get on with the show. Also want to give a shout out to our students in Syracuse in the HERG. I appreciate them being there and participating in this. I also need to thank my professor, Hub Brown, who was there in Syracuse making it happen on our end of it. Also, many thanks to my colleagues at Syracuse who I enlisted their help in trying to make this all happen. Karen Spears, Sam Edelstein, Scott McDowell. I really appreciate your work and efforts on behalf of this project, and I'm extremely grateful for the heavy lifting that you all did and for pulling all of this together. And certainly my colleague and partner in crime on this, Ron Thomas, who you'll hear from in a little bit, because it was his idea, and it was he who encouraged me to really think about how we might do this together, and I'm glad that we did. I think Morehouse and Syracuse University have started something, and I hope that this is not the end of it. So thank you very much. We're happy to be here.
Thank you, Dean. And now the person behind this great idea, a friend and a dear colleague. He is a fantastic journalist, a great sports writer, the director of journalism and sports program here at Morehouse College. Please welcome Ron Thomas.
Well, welcome to all of you coming tonight. It's a great pleasure to have you here. This is our first attempt at doing a collaboration with another college, and it's been a wonderful experience working with Dean Branham, who I've known for many, many years. We've been to many black journalist conventions, and we meet each other all the time, say hello, may have coffee or whatever. And you know, we've had a friendship over the years, but never anything formal. So it's wonderful that we are able to get together and decide to present a program together. So first of all, I want to thank Dean Branham for participating in this and joining in this enterprise. I also want to thank her staff. She has named the individuals who have worked really hard and tirelessly at putting together this project. You know, when you sit down, when Dean Brandon and I sat down and we talked, you know, you say, yeah, we're going to do this, you know, it sounds like a great plan. But then when you get down to the real work, then I found out how hard it is to put together a project when the other half of the project is at least 1,000 miles away. And so her staff has made several trips down here before tonight, and then they've come back. We've had a Thursday morning phone call at 10 a.m. for 2 or 3 months. I don't know what I'm going to do at 10 a.m. now. I've got to fill that gap somehow. But they have been wonderful, and it's been great to collaborate with them. So thank you very much. I also wanted to thank several people from the Morehouse and AUC community. And well, I'd like to start with our new Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dean Clarissa Myrick Harris. And can you just stand for a second? She joined us in July, and she's a former journalist, so I was absolutely thrilled when she was hired as our new dean. And she's been very supportive of our journalism and sports program here, and she's extremely supportive of the idea of collaborating with other colleges in many different ways. So her support has been really crucial to me and to this venture. I want to also acknowledge our journalism students. And they have been terrific. All of you have a copy of our election edition, which I'm extremely proud of, and they did a wonderful job putting it together. Both the writing, the layout, all of that was their creation, and so they've done a terrific job. The students who checked you in when you came in, the students who gave you your programs when you walked in the door here, many of them are from the Maroon Tiger newspaper staff, and also from housesports.org, which is our organization of students who want to become sports reporters. And I was a sports reporter for 35 years before I came here, and sports reporting is an important part of our program, which is a general journalism program. But those two organizations have been very helpful and supportive to me, and as their advisor, I cannot tell you how proud I am of the work they've done on this project and in the previous years. So I definitely wanted to acknowledge them. And also any of our journalism students and other students from Clark and Spelman also who are here tonight. I also wanted to acknowledge there are high school students here from 5 high schools in Atlanta. And I just want to thank them for coming. I hope that you find this to be an inspiring introduction to college life. I hope you've talked to the admissions people both from Syracuse and from Morehouse. And we hope to share, I guess. Since this is a collaboration, I hope half of you go to Syracuse and half of you come to Morehouse. So, you have to have sponsors to put on a program like this. They're absolutely essential. And I want to acknowledge the 2 major sponsors who have supported us in this venture. One of them is my colleague here at Morehouse, Dr. Julius Coles. He is the interim director of the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership. And Julius, would you please stand? Julius has been a dear friend and colleague and supporter of this program, and I really appreciate his contribution to it. And then also, I want to thank Mr. Curly Dossman. Curly Dossman is the president of Georgia Pacific Foundation, and their support was actually critical to having this program occur. So, Curly, I'd like you to come up and say a few words to greet our audience. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Good evening, everyone. Georgia Pacific has been a long-standing supporter of the college. And in particular, we've been supported with Dr. Coles and the Andy Young School here at the center in terms of sponsoring a number of forums here in this particular building and forum. So we're delighted to be back again and to be a supporter in that context. Secondly, I'm pleased to be part of this effort today because as an alumnus and a graduate of Morehouse and a political science major who tutelage under Dr. Robert Brisbane and Abraham Davis, and went on to actually get involved in working for governor and working for the U.S. Senate and ran and been involved in a number of congressional and presidential campaigns. So it has a personal interest in the topic for myself. And third and finally, I'm pleased to really just have to repay a debt that I owed for a long time, and that's to Angela, who asked me to consider being a sponsor. And when Angela was live and had a good forum and she had a television station and presence there, she was very kind to me when I was president of the Atlanta chapter of the 100 Black Men. And she did a great job in helping us launch and get our branding going by providing us opportunities on the TV, even some primetime TV, not those late nights, 1 hour pieces of working. And so, and currently serving now as the national president of the 100 Black Men of America. I'm pleased to repay that debt to you, Angela, and thank you very much. And finally, also, I have some colleagues who here I want to recognize. First of all is JaCatherine Ross. JaCatherine, would you stand? She's our executive director of our Youth Entrepreneurs Program. But not only she directs our Youth Entrepreneurs Program, but she's also been involved in a collaboration with the Leadership and Entrepreneur Center here at Morehouse, and actually has been an adjunct professor teaching entrepreneurship for non-business majors. And also Scott Brown. Scott, would you stand? He's our program director. And I have just a little synergy, and I'm glad to see Morehouse and Syracuse collaborating in this context, because when I was a senior at Morehouse, I had the opportunity to have an internship with HUD, and doing that in urban planning. And one of the opportunities I had was to consider Syracuse for a master's in urban planning. And I decided to go to WashU Law School because they had both a dual degree program in law and urban planning, but I was getting some indirect synergy from Syracuse at that point. And then Angela knows my son's first girlfriend from Spelman came under Angela's tutelage, and she actually moved to Syracuse in the School of Journalism and sponsored by Angela and moved forward. So I'm glad to have both of you here tonight and be a part of that effort, and now I can make those indirect contacts more directly. But again, I'm pleased to be part of this effort, and we look forward to joining you for the rest of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, and the winner is, can we roll the tape, please?
You didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
I couldn't believe he actually said that. He said, you're taking me out of context. The context is worse than the quote.
When it comes to a woman's right to make her own healthcare choices, they want to take us back to the policies more suited to the 1950s than the 21st century.
I'm sorry, Jim, I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS. I'm going to stop other things. I like PBS. I love Big Bird. I actually like you too. But I'm not going to keep on spending money on things to borrow money from China to pay for us. That's number one.
I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets.
I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women. Well, I'm not getting rid of all of healthcare reform. Of course, there are a number of things that I like in healthcare reform that I'm going to put in place.
We got to name this condition that he's going through. I think it's called Romnesia.
What happened in Benghazi was, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo.
It was very clear this was not a demonstration. This was an attack by terrorists.
So I've got Mr. Obama sitting here, and I just was going to ask him a couple questions.
No president, not me, not any of my predecessors, no one could have fully repaired all the damage that he found in just 4 years.
The 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they're victims.
It's been a great working relationship to make sure that we're doing the jobs that people elected us to do. And I cannot thank the President enough for his personal concern and compassion for our state and for the people of our state.
CNN projects that Barack Obama will be re-elected President of the United States. He will remain in the White House for another 4 years.
At a time like this, we can't risk partisan bickering and political posturing. Our leaders have to reach across the aisle to do the people's work.
We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions, and we remain more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America. And together, with your help and God's grace, we will continue our journey forward.
Take it from a broadcast journalist. so very much. We want to remind everyone that Syracuse is indeed watching go orange. I know the students are ready, so let's get it started. Ladies and gentlemen, he's back. At the White House. He's back. We have a distinguished panel. And I'm not going to go into detail in their bio. It's printed, and I respect that you have glanced at it and will read it, but I do want to highlight some things about them. And as I talk about them, I'll have them come up and take their places on the stage. We are so very, very honored to have each and every one here with us. I do want to make an apology for Michel Martin. She could not be here. There's an emergency. She is okay, but she sends her deep love and deep regrets. So we know her spirit is with us in this room. And can we just give her a big round of applause? She's going through some things. It's all good. Associate Professor of Political Science here at Morehouse College, Dr. Hasan Crockett, has been an educator for 25 years. He's taught at every level of the United States educational system, elementary, middle, high school, colleges, and universities, which really means he has seen it all. Over the past 20 years, his research has covered a variety of issues, including civil rights, organized labor, opinion poll research, and instructional technology. He holds numerous awards and honors and has authored several publications. Please give a big round of applause to Dr. Hasan Crockett. As editor of CNNPolitics.com, Bryan Monroe is responsible for all things digital, CNN's political coverage, and CNN.com. He led the coverage of the 2008 presidential election for Ebony and Jet magazines prior. He is the former president of the National Association of Black Journalists, and while he is knee-deep in politics, he is quick to tell you that his last major interview with the king of pop, he got it before Michael Jackson moved on to moonwalk in glory. Please welcome Bryan Monroe. It's good to have my homegirl back. As a veteran newspaper journalist, Cynthia Tucker is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and a visiting professor of journalism, and Charlene Hunter Galt, distinguished write-in-residence at the University of Georgia. She was the editorial page editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 17 years, a winner of numerous awards, including Journalist of the Year from the National Association of Black Journalists. And on January 17, 2013, she will be inducted into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame. We are so proud. And she is literally just got here moments ago because she actually... Okay, I'm not going to hold that against you, my sister, because we already talked about that. But she had to do hardball with Chris Matthews. So she was running a little late, and I was like, I can't believe you go and see Chris. We're not going to be here on time. But she's here, and we're so very happy. With more than 15 years' experience, Dade writes news analysis about federal policy, national politics, social trends, and cultural issues. As national correspondent of the NPR digital news team. Prior to NPR, he was an Atlanta-based reporter covering Southern politics and economics for the Wall Street Journal, based here in ATL. He is indeed, on a special note, my former president of the Atlanta Association of Black Journalists. He is now Region 2 Director for the National Association of Black Journalists. It's good to have him back in the ATL, Mr. Dade. And yes, you can blame everyone from Syracuse for the cold weather. Our last panelist also bleeds blue and orange, director of the Campbell Public Affairs Institute and professor of political science at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, Dr. Grant Reeher. An author, columnist, radio host. Reeher's research and teaching interests include American politics and political theory. He co-authored the book that should really be, Grant, if I can say, on the reading list of everyone in Congress. The Trusted Leader, Building the Relationships That Make Government Work. Please welcome Dr. Grant Reeher. I'm going to step around you, Dr. Crockett, and join everyone here in the special space. We want to remind everyone that Syracuse is also standing by. Can you hear me, Syracuse? Can they hear me? Great, it's all good because they're not responding, so we don't know if they can hear. Okay, very good. I'm going to start as we look at this analysis and the future. I want to start with our political experts on the end, if that's okay. We know, according to the numbers, and that everything is just all in now, of how this president was reelected to a degree. Everyone say it was all demographics. It was about demographics. When you look quickly, about 93% African American, 73% Asian, 71% Latino. I think our numbers correspond with 60% 18 to 29-year-olds, 54% women. He took single women, also LGBT. Does that basically dictate what election and what the nation will look like in the future as you kind of give us that backdrop? You told me earlier you weren't surprised. You knew a year ago. Let's start with Dr. Crockett.
Okay, well, OMG.
Right, first of all.
Right, what happened? We woke up on the 8th and said, this is a different country. And the demographics that she shows us tells us how different we have become since 2010, actually since 2000. In fact, the winner is the 2010 census, because we're talking about a different world, a different country here. And so the 332 electoral votes, the 206, the numbers that Angela just gave us really tells us that we're moving, it's a sea change, we're moving toward a different direction. But what does it mean now? I think that's what we're going to talk about. What does it mean in the future? We got some policy implications here. The cliffhanger, the budget cliff that we're looking at, the fiscal cliff as they call it. We also have to look at the history books are being rewritten. Campaigns are changing. This man has mastered the social media as Roosevelt mastered the radio, Kennedy's mastered the TV. This man has mastered the social media. So we're talking about some different changes, but we also need to look at how's he going to move forward? How's he going to look at, because some of the things are very much the same when we look at Congress. $400 billion, and we still have the same Congress. We still have the same demographics there. So how do we move forward? So I think that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and I think that's a good backdrop.
Dr. Reeher, you said you weren't surprised. You called this a year ago.
Well, before I talk about that, I just want to say at the beginning, if I could quickly, what a thrill and honor it is for me to be on this stage with these panelists and with the folks that are in the audience and at this school with the rich tradition and the history. So I really appreciated the invitation. And yes, you're right, I was not surprised. If this were a Syracuse audience in person, although I can say it remotely, I would be saying right now, I told you so. So I'm going to say it anyway, I told you so. But I've been saying for the last year to anyone who had listened that I thought the president would be reelected. I thought that it would be a landslide, but it wouldn't be all that close. The one thing that did surprise me, I would have thought the popular vote would have been a little more in his favor than it was, but the Electoral College vote didn't surprise me, nor the quickness with which the election was called. I was talking to a colleague of mine at Syracuse who used to be president at Clark Atlanta, Walter Broadnax. So the day of the election, he said, Grant, you know, I'm getting old. I don't know if I'm going to want to stay up really late and see this, but I've got to. I said, Walter, don't worry. It's going to be called a little bit after 11 o'clock, and it was. The reason why I say that is this, or why I said that. The demographics are important, and we're going to want to talk about that, I think. I actually think that the demographics create some dangers for the Democrats, as well as the obvious ones for the Republicans. And maybe we might want to come back to that later. But what I really had in mind in thinking this is just a very simple aspect about American elections, particularly presidential elections, and that is the importance of candidate quality. Somebody had to beat that president, and I didn't see that somebody out there. And I think there's, to unpack that a little bit further, and again, maybe this is for later, but the last 40 years worth of presidential elections have been won by the person who's more likable, who people trust. I would challenge anybody to give me a counterexample to that. And the fact that you reelected a president who's African American, who had some of the, on paper, challenges that an incumbent president would have, unemployment rate, et cetera. I think that his reelection is a very powerful and I think still underreported, hopeful sign about race and racism in this country. And so one of the things that I was thinking of and I thought was being underestimated over time in the last year or so was the degree to which there would be a mobilization among certain groups, but folks have to be receptive to the messenger in favor of re-electing this president. So I was not surprised at the effectiveness of the ground game that we've heard so much about in doing this. I thought that this would happen, and I was glad to see that it did happen.
We should have called you like at 8 o'clock, I guess, and some of us wouldn't have been prepared to stay up at 2 a.m. But understand what you're saying. I'm going to have my journalists weigh in on this because both our political experts bring up good points. Yes, it was the demographics. Yes, it seemed to be a roadmap about that before election night. How does this speak to the road ahead? You all weigh in on it.
Well, you know, the demographics were important, and we did a piece looking at that. There's all this talk about, and we knew from demographers and the real smart guys out here that America had been going through a significant demographic change. And so the talk was, is a new America arriving? I think the Tuesday showed it has arrived. It is here. For so long, groups, women, people of color, have been fighting for a seat at the table. It is now our table. And that changes a very scary thing for individuals. We saw that play out in conservative media, and that for a lot of folks, they didn't see this coming. They did not see what happened. But that sea change we saw in the turnout wasn't an instantaneous thing. I remember I was in Des Moines, Iowa during the Iowa caucuses, during the Republican caucus, and I went to a barbershop and sat and talked with a young brother who was cutting hair, who in 2008 was out there 100% for Barack Obama. And he campaigned, he got his whole shop together, his wife went out, and this time around, this is back in January, he said, you know, I'm not feeling it. I don't know if I'm gonna vote for him again. I don't know if I'm gonna vote. And I sat and talked to him for a long time and said, and furthermore, I'm gonna tell my wife not to vote. I'm going, whoa, and so, you know, we talked, and he was not motivated, wasn't the energy. And I then watched between January and last Tuesday, the Obama machine, which was very effective, marshal their resources in their voter outreach and get out the vote efforts. And while the Republicans were fighting amongst themselves during the primary and caucus season, and in fact was taking who someone could be seen as fairly moderate in Mitt Romney and pulling him far to the right, and he had to come back there after April, after he secured the nomination. Meanwhile, the Democrats were out there putting together their field offices. They had like a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 advantage in Ohio, in Virginia, in Florida, in getting that ground game together. And so that became one of the keys to the Tuesday turnout. I know you thought it was already a done deal. I can tell you, we at CNN, we had dozens of contingency plans for all kinds of scenarios.
But you did call it about 11:15.
Called 11:18.
Call it 11:18. I thought so. Let me ask you, because you both bring up good points, especially when you say the way this landscape looks now, it is a danger possibly for the Democrats. Clearly, many are saying the Republicans are on a rebranding campaign when you look at the demographics. Agree to that, Cynthia?
They should be. They should be doing more than rebranding. They should be rethinking the message that they have been both explicitly and implicitly putting out there to voters of color for, I would argue, the last 50 years. You know, we talk about demographics and the different ethnic voting blocks that Obama has successfully assembled are very important to his coalition. But I would argue that this business of separating voters by ethnicity actually started with the Republican Party around 1964, when Lyndon Johnson is rumored to have said to an aide, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, we have handed the South to the Republican Party for a generation. he was off by a generation or two. And since then, Republicans have invested heavily in a Southern strategy, which I would argue that they then took all over the country. A strategy of both implicitly and explicitly being disparaging toward voters of color. One of the things that I learned just today was that in a post-election conference call to several of his big money donors and to some of his top-level aides, Mitt Romney said that the reason that Barack Obama won was because of all these gifts that he had handed out to the key voting blocs in his coalition, to young people, to African Americans, to Latinos, which led me to say on hardball, I'm still waiting for my gift. It hadn't arrived yet. And so that
said her new 40 acres.
Right. Yes. 40 acres, right. Go ahead. Or my Obama phone, which is the conservatives, some of the conservatives kept talking about over the course of the election. And so, but if you look back, this shouldn't be a great surprise. Some of us have been covering conventions for years now, and for at least 20 years, the difference between who showed up at a Democratic convention and who showed up at a Republican convention was pretty stark. And so in many ways, the demographics make this difference, that the people of color have become large enough in number to make a significant difference in terms of a presidential election. But we have been on this track, the Republican Party being the party of older white people, and the Democratic Party being not just the party of Americans of color, but of younger voters and of many college-educated voters. We've been on this track, I would argue, for 40 or 50 years now.
Corey, I'm going to let you weigh in. I just want to ask everyone to please turn off those cell phones. I'm so sorry to mention that at the top. We're saying it now. I do want you to tweet that you're here and these wonderful people are here. But please, out of respect, we're asking you to turn the cell phones off. Corey, I know you want to weigh in because you are waiting for your gift and your 40. Go ahead.
Well, I think just to sort of sound a little bit of a different note, Obama's largest number of votes still came from white people. And that's something to keep in mind. So, as Cynthia just said, we've been on this trend for years. This is probably definitely the third presidential election cycle where minorities, whether by their participation in the election or non-participation in the election, actually were one of the decisive factors here. But I think also I wanted to throw this out. Republicans control the governorships of about 30 states now. Republicans control the state legislatures of more than 25 states. So in those same states, those are the same states where we have these demographic shifts. And yet on the state level, we're not seeing it manifest necessarily. So I think we need to sort of understand that there's a bigger picture here. It doesn't, demographics is one thing, but what I think we're seeing now is that, voters of color are sophisticated when it comes to looking at elections. You have to be the good candidate. You have to be the convincing candidate that carries their message, and you have to be able to get them out to vote as a campaign itself. So just by virtue of the fact that the browning of America is happening doesn't automatically lend itself to an Obama victory, doesn't automatically lend itself to a Democratic victory. I think we need to keep in mind also that where Obama is concerned, this is the second straight election where many of the pundits got it wrong consistently. And many of the pollsters got it wrong consistently. And part of it does get back to the demographics. So when you think about young people, think about people of color, they don't have landlines, for example. Right. So it makes it difficult to be polled. When a pollster wants to call, they usually use landlines. Now, pollsters have been shifting to use cell phones, but you also think about the fact that people of color are the #1 users of mobile digital technology. they outnumber white users easily. And so one of the things that the Obama campaign has done since 2008 is keep cell phone numbers. Cell phone numbers now are like the mother's milk of Democratic politics. And so as a result, there are all these different ways in which the Obama campaign was able to mobilize, but you have to have the machinery, you have to have the strong candidate. And if you don't, you see the other results, like in these state elections. So I think that's sort of the counterweight I'd offer.
Although, from the state standpoint, you could argue that the state political mechanisms were not nearly as aggressive and sophisticated as the national ones. And we saw that in 2010, for example. The big midterm push, the shellacking that the Republicans put on the Democrats, a lot of that came out of, where that showed up was at the state level, not just the governors, but the attorney generals. That's why you saw 19 voter ID, flavors of voter fraud laws on the books that went on between 2010 and 2012. That came out because of those attorneys generals, governors, and state houses. And I think what you may see come 2014 is the voter lists, the cell phones, the email addresses percolate down to the state level and start to see a shift there, or maybe not.
Well, I think to that point, you know, state political parties are really the parties that define the national campaigns. So if the infrastructure that led to Obama's victory in Virginia in 2008, it's the same state level infrastructure that led to, say, Tim Kaine's victory this year for the Senate, Democratic Senate. But it's also the same infrastructure that basically broke down and allowed Bob McDonnell, the Republican in Virginia, to win. So you're talking about really the same state, the same players on the state level mobilizing voters. It just depends on what the election is. The difference is the strength of the candidate, the money that a national campaign can bring in. And so, you know, it's just a matter of whether or not you can push the right buttons in those states to get what you want.
And another point on the state issue is the fact that the urban vote versus the rural vote. Romney won more counties than Obama did. And if you look at the counties map, you will see how it is the black belt in the South. You will see how it runs up the eastern coast, and et cetera. So when you talk about the state elections, and depending upon how their structure is in each individual state, and each individual state is different. So you're talking about how state elections are more localized, and when you have an urban versus rural, then you're going to have a different outcome with that demographic. But another issue, especially with the journalists here, is the whole issue around the conservative entertainment industry and how they created a bubble that they drank their own Kool-Aid, and they were completely wrong. I think you mentioned a little bit about the polls, and we talk about polls all the time. I think right now the polls, this random sampling thing, maybe we'll get to that. I think it's a myth going on right now. They're getting a 9% return. They're not even getting the cell phones and all that. They're not even getting a decent response. And the non-responses, nobody admits to their non-responses. None of the polls do. So I think we're looking at the whole issue around what happened with the polls, what happened with the journalists, most of us were, oh gosh, it's close. There was no battle in the battle states. It wasn't a battle. I mean, journalists, help us out here.
I'm going to let you weigh in on that a little bit and then kind of switch up on you. But go right ahead. That's a good point. Go ahead.
Well, you know, polls, we spend a lot of time, our polling director, Keating Holland, has been doing this for 20 years. And oddly enough, you look, I can't speak for all the polls, Gallup and NBC, but I know at CNN's polls, we were pretty close to what happened. Our national numbers, we were 51-48 and then 49-49 on national. But the battleground states, we looked at the 9, became 8 once we changed North Carolina battleground states. Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Colorado. And the polls that we either did or worked with in those states came out, we had Obama up by 4.5 points with a 3.5 point margin of error in Ohio. It came out to be roughly that. And so there are many polls and many mechanisms. There's some pollsters that we don't really use that do automated calls. We don't touch those. Some that use internet-based polling. We don't touch those. But the ones that, I'm not the polling expert, but our guys who do this I would stand by their work. They did a pretty good job at that. But that said, the polls really came down to those key states. And the fact that Obama won 8 of the 9 battleground states was a landslide by anybody's measure.
And in the polling thing, we can weigh in as a journalist. We're all gonna, the media community and each media outlet is going to spin their poll and the information to fit the message that they're all trying to get out. I love how you phrase it, this entertainment, love ourselves.
David Frum's line, yeah.
It is, and we are, and there's so many, and I think we've been hearing more and more from public, enough of the polls, enough of the predictions. Let us go in, let us wait, I think, when we're looking at all of the things you're saying, the demographics, the likability. Hadn't heard anybody say because somebody voted for that policy, but the likability, the trust, and all of that. But when we look at all of that, and Obama is back in the White House, how does this president approach this second term then? How does all of that happen? What does he do? It's a whole lot at stake. We're falling off a cliff. We need immigration reform. Because many are saying, this is wonderful, all these things happen, but do we have 4 more years of gridlock?
That's the $64,000 question. I mean, this is President Obama, Barack Obama, has never been in a political environment where he's been able to operate based on what he wants to do versus worrying about re-election, even when he was on the state level. So, at this point, what will we see? What will he do? Everyone's going to be watching about it. Does he, when it comes time to talk about the fiscal cliff, when it comes time to, sort of turn the corner into the new congressional session, does he change his negotiating tactics as opposed to sort of in the way that Democrats criticize him for giving up too much on the front end? It remains to be seen. I think he's always looked at himself, and he said it, as a foil. People project onto him what they want to happen. Well, this is the first time that he can actually project his own agenda without worrying about the background.
What's going to happen down
I mean, a lot of what he did in his first term, he was willing to take either sort of a middling victory or a tie or a loss in an effort to show that he was going to govern in a certain way. So the commitment to collaboration, the commitment to bipartisanship, sort of staying a little bit away from, staying out of sort of Congress's efforts to get different legislation passed. He was doing that so that he could actually sort of build up some chips that he could cash in this election. And that actually, as a result, bared out in polls. We go back to polls again. If you look at it, his likability was one of the one barometers that didn't dip with everything else. And so at the end of the day, he had much more credibility when he came out to voters and he started talking about how he wants to govern. And now he has a chance to act on it.
I think there's another poll number that I saw today that I think will have a lot of bearing on certainly the battle over taxes and a word that Washington uses all the time, but normal people don't. Sequestration.
Yes. You're right.
The sound of channels clicking.
Yes.
Get that remote and go to ESPN now.
There was a poll which showed that the vast majority, if there is no conclusion, if there is no agreement on taxes and the cuts that are dictated, and we all do fall off this cliff, who will be blamed? And the poll said something like 60% of Americans will blame the Republicans. I think that number alone gives the president much more bargaining room, much more authority, much more political capital than he had in his first 4 years. He also has more room, and not only does he not have to run again, but the economy is much better than it was when he first took office. It is certainly not in as nearly as good a shape as it needs to be, but I think much of his knuckling under to the Republicans was due to the fact that he was worried that things could get even worse. We were very vulnerable then, and he doesn't have to worry about that to quite the same extent. By contrast, the Republicans do have to worry, at least those among them who are in the reality-based universe. They've just taken their own shellacking. Not all of them have gotten the message by any means, but some of them will have gotten the message. And he only needs 35 to 40 Republicans in the House to come to their senses and vote along with his proposals on taxes, for example.
Ben, I know you want to weigh in.
Yeah, a couple things. Second term, I think the problem, I agree with you that he's freer now in the second term than he was in the first term. Problem is there's no money. And certainly what's going to preoccupy his presidency is in the second term is going to be dealing with the fiscal issues. And the other two big issues that are out there that I think he would have wanted to have done something significant on is immigration and global warming. I think what you're going to see are some smaller bore kinds of things that look more like perhaps what was proposed with George W. Bush. So that's one issue for him. But the danger that I see for the Democrats here, and I want to go back to something Cynthia said about gifts and what you said about demographics, Corey said about demographics, is in thinking about how they approach this second term from an electoral strategy, thinking down the road, is this. And I guess, you know, someone's got to defend Romney and the Republicans, so I guess it'll be me here. But if you think about this election, okay, it was a shellacking, but in another way, it was close. 330,000 votes in the right states would have turned this election for Romney. Compare that with 120,000 in 2004 that would have turned that election for John Kerry. Romney did do better among a number of different demographic groups beyond whites during this election as compared with 2008. So here's, I think, the concern for the Democrats is they look at the demographics and they might be tempted here to start thinking in a certain kind of policy way. They might be tempted to think like Clinton a little bit in one particular respect, and that's to say maybe we should target certain kinds of policy goodies for certain kinds of groups and sort of stake our claim on that. And here's why I think that might be a problem. First of all, it's not clear beyond African Americans from a voting perspective how these groups are going to play out. It's not clear yet whether Latinos are going to be like African Americans, where they're going to have a historically grounded loyalty to a party that they will keep for generations. It's not clear that Asian Americans are going to be that type of group either. In terms of young people, it's not clear whether this is what social scientists would call a cohort effect or a generation effect. That is, as these younger people get older, get married, buy houses, have kids, are they going to, in a sense, grow into being Republicans? Right. We don't know that yet. So the problem, I think, for the Democrats is they may be tempted to be seeing these groups as fixed entities and generate micro-targeted policies to them. But let's not forget, who would have predicted that the debt and the deficit and concerns about that would become, just 3 or 4 years ago, the #1 issue for voters? It was never the #1 issue. It was always 3, 4 down the list. All of a sudden, with the Tea Party, it became the #1 issue. So I think the concern is if they start thinking in those terms, and then you have this continuing concern about, can we afford this? Can we be doing new programs? This could be a recipe for a problem if you get the right kind of Republican counter message. And I absolutely agree with you. They've got to rethink this. But some sort of more libertarian, economically conservative message could resonate. And so I think that's something that I would be worried for the Democrats.
Yeah. One piece on that. Yeah, one piece on that. I think it's very important for us to not make the Democrats a monolithic organization. There's factions. There's the progressive wing, and there's also the Wall Street wing, there's a centrist wing, Clinton, and the centrist wing. And where does Obama fit in this? I think he's more of a centrist. He kind of sees himself as a centrist. And I think we need to look at the Democratic Party not as, okay, they have a collective view on how they're going to dole out their policies. I think there's a battle going on right now. First group he met with yesterday, or was it today? Was the AFL-CIO.
Yeah, labor leaders.
And then the labor unions is the first group he met with, and then he met with the business leaders and et cetera. And so you have these factions within the Democratic Party that is revealing itself, and it's going to reveal itself through the policies through the next 4 years. So I think we have to make sure that we look at, because in the Slate magazine, I can't think of the guy's name, he labeled Obama a moderate Republican. So there's, he hasn't led as in the progressive. He's always had that progressive wing attacking him consistently for his policies. So we can't label or look at the Democratic Party as a monolithic.
Yeah, healthcare was a great example. The single
and healthcare and a single.
But if you look at what is Obama 2.0, look at his press conference today.
Yes. Yes.
You saw a much more liberated president. He knows that he has run his last campaign. He is
done running. I love it.
He is free to do some of the policies that he may or may not have gone with 4 years ago. But you also saw a sterner Obama. When John McCain and Lindsey Graham came after UN Secretary Susan Rice, he looked them basically in the eye through the cameras and said, don't go there. You want to go after her? You come to me. And that is something, I don't know if he's had the courage or the strength or the freedom to be that clearly, to basically say, bring it on. And I think you're going to see more of that, at least over the next few weeks, particularly as you go through. You saw today he put his first tax volley out there for the fiscal cliff challenge of $1.6 billion in new taxes or new tax revenue. That's the opening volley, but he's clearly he's made it clear that any legislation that comes to him that does not eliminate the tax cut for those for the wealthy, he will veto.
Can I jump back in on that
Absolutely.
really quick?
Just to put this in, he is standing free and comfortable when you're back in, and you're pretty much going to say what you need to say and do what you're going to do. You're back. He's there. But I think in your follow-up, we also heard, but I'm willing, I know I've made mistakes, I will compromise, I've got a different vision, I know I don't have it all, we all come together. Speaker of the House said the other day, I am the most reasonable person here.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
very reasonable. We are willing to do it, but I still heard.
Believe that.
And I still, well, man said, I'm going to take man's word. But we're still, in many ways, sitting at, if they hold the middle class in hostage, and if we don't do something, I think the president said today, we can deal with this cliff, sign over to help the middle class, 98% won't have to pay taxes, 97% small businesses won't go. We can take care of that next week. I'm willing to do it. Here on the other side say we're willing to do an olive branch. Really? No.
No, you'll see this at the end, December 30th,
so you have
a deal.
To put out that volume. And Buffett told us, don't worry about it, we got till February. Go ahead.
But here's the thing. I want to go back to what I said before and connect it to what you said. Here is the big thing he can do in a second term. And the great thing is this doesn't cost a penny.
Bring us there.
And that is to go back to 2008 and what got everybody so excited about him in the first place, to change the way that politics works in Washington. And that's how I interpreted that press conference today. He's starting that process, basically saying, I'm not going to put up with this stuff anymore, and I am going to really put my foot down on this. And so I think it's going to be a blend of that kind of compromise, olive branch, but also speaking more authoritatively and more forcefully about this. I mean, that could be, and I don't want to sound like I'm just going off into fantasy world here, but I've always been someone that wants to see the political process get better. And I think this could be sort of the great gift that this president could achieve in a second term, because the money's not going to be there for a lot of the other programs. But if he could do that, which is the main reason why people lost their enthusiasm about him in the first term, and to begin with, was they didn't feel like that was coming through. I mean, it came back.
And
that was the disappointment. That was where the disappointment
was. A lot of progressives even challenged him was on too many turns during his first term, and too many times they felt that he wimped out, he punked out. He wasn't forceful enough on the issues that they cared about to stand firm. He compromised or gave up too easily. And I think that's a shift that could happen. I don't know it will. He is at his heart a pragmatist. He really is. I remember he sat in my office in December of 2006, before he even announced that he was running for president, and he talked about very pragmatic, kind of middle of the road ideas and platforms. They weren't extreme to one way or the other. I think at his heart he wants to get things done, but he's been up against some pretty significant forces.
I think you're absolutely right that at his heart, at his core, he's a pragmatist and a centrist. And I think, however, that he learned some lessons over the last 4 years. It took him much longer to learn those lessons than I thought it would, but I think he seriously believed that he could change the way business was done in Washington, that he could sit down with other reasonable people and, they would come to terms.
That's an oxymoron, isn't it?
And that's not, from day one, Mitch McConnell, we all know his statement on the record, our priority is to ensure that he's a one-term president. Now, here's the question, though. Not only did they lose that battle, but the Tea Party, the strain of republicanism that says we never compromise ever and we hate this man, is still there, is still in the Republican Party. So the question becomes, will there be those 35 to 40 Republicans that Obama can do business with? I think for any of you out there who are in the business community, all the people from Georgia Pacific, I think one of the biggest constituencies with serious influence on this process is the business community, because they influence Republicans. Will they go to the leaders of the Republican Party and say, you raise taxes on us, please. Do what you need to do to avert this disaster. So far, they've talked a good game, but it's all been talk. If business folks had really applied pressure earlier, I don't think we'd be here today.
You bring up an interesting point, and another question that was floating around today and has been floating around. Corey, is he bold enough? Is he free enough to say, let's go over the cliff?
Obama?
Yes.
No.
And see what the chips fall their weather may, because
but
some
I
were
think
saying
that,
if he does that,
but I don't think that
Republicans
would be
blamed for it.
I don't think Obama saying let's go over the cliff would be a mark of his boldness. I think that would be a mark of stupidity. And I think most voters would agree they don't want him to do that. They may want him to call the Republicans bluff in general, but not to say, all right, you want to go? Let's go. We're going off the cliff. I'm going to lead you off. No. Nobody wants that. None of his supporters want that.
Right.
Yeah, no.
But what I'm asking is, that to let this expire.
Yeah.
And to take it and be that bold to say if they cannot come to the table, if we all can't come to the table, we're not going to sit through gridlock on this. This man said today, here's a plan and we can get this signed in a week.
I think what we're seeing so far is, I think we're seeing a different Obama. I think what we're seeing also is, they put out their tax plan. It's now 1.6 now at this point. The truth of the matter is, there is nothing different in their proposal than a year ago.
Exactly.
They're standing pat. They feel like this election gives them, or gives him the ultimate sort of position to say, the plan is the plan, our deal is the deal, we're not changing. And I think they've put that out there very clearly. And so, I think that's where you're seeing the boldness. That's where you're seeing sort of maybe a proper amount of rigidity that you didn't see a year ago and in previous issues. So I think that, when it comes to, the fiscal cliff, and I just don't think for him the calculation will be, we're going to go over it, we're going to go over this cliff. I think the calculation already is, we're going to sit down, we're going to do this, but I'm telling you up front, the deal that we had a year ago, it's the same deal. And I think there's movement. I think what you'll see when you talk about Cynthia, the 35 to 40 members of Congress who are Republicans, start looking at the members of Congress, the Republicans in Congress whose seats may be potentially vulnerable. That's where you may see movement. Seats where you have, in states where you have companies coming to these lawmakers and saying, we need to end this economic uncertainty. What corporations say is that economic uncertainty, what they're talking about is really policy coming out of Washington that impacts how they do business. So whether you're talking about regulations, whether you're talking about sort of whether or not sort of the trade gets affected by the tax plans, that's what their issue is. That's why they're not hiring. And so I think the question becomes, how many of these Republicans in Congress may feel vulnerable in their seats? And that's an open question because after redistricting, we just had redistricting. After redistricting, remember what we talked about, these Republicans who control the majority of the state legislatures, they set themselves up for the next 10 years. So many of these Republicans in the House, their seats are safe. So there is really going to be a serious fight on the Republican side. Boehner is a deal maker at his core.
True.
Can he get them in line? He's already told them, y'all got to get in line.
Well, and one of the things too that has changed is if you look at, especially during the primary process on the Republican side, they purged a lot of the moderates out of the party.
Absolutely.
And that's going to come back and cause trouble, particularly for Boehner. But it's another thing to look at, and this is part of the core problem the Republicans have, is that they have lost the popular vote in 5 out of the last 6 elections, and they've got to do something about that. Right. But getting back to Boehner and can he get those 30 or 35? He has, I guess, on the other side of his coin, the momentum from Obama. That in many ways, what the country went through in 2010 with the Tea Party was difficult and struggling and painful, but almost necessary. That the country had to see the results of that extremism and see how it played out in order to come back to where it is now, or where it's heading right now. It had to see that the no compromise, the 10-to-1 talk that was during the debates about $10 in cuts for every dollar in tax revenue, they wouldn't accept that. The country had to go through that because now I think Boehner has a little bit more juice in bringing those somewhat moderates in the House back over to the table.
I'm going to shift it just a little bit because I do have to buy the time and we want to take questions from the audience. In this second term, a whole lot can happen, as we know. We're looking at this fiscal cliff. He has the possibility to appoint probably another Supreme Court justice, so we're looking at that situation. But I'm also curious about these cabinet positions. I think we have a new appointment that happened recently that I don't think was on his table, and a very secret appointment. That the secret is out. Now we have to look at the CIA. I don't know if that was on the list originally. Boy, is that a different talk show. But seriously, how does he approach that? What are some of the names that are tossing out that you all are hearing that we need to look at when we're talking about this spirit of compromise to get anything done? Will he reach across the aisle? Should he reach for Mitt Romney in a position? That's been a big talk. He praised him today and said he would sit and talk with him, and he thought he did an excellent job in handling the Olympics. We've got key cabinet positions open. Susan Rice, he's ready to fight if she gets nominated. So is Kerry the next chief of staff? Throwing it out there. Dan.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is, again, he's going to have pressure from the right and the left. And I want to get to the cabinet appointments, but also on the fiscal cliff, really we have to look at that as our austerity program that we're finding in Europe. We're talking about a reduction in public spending. We're talking about taxes We're talking about slowing down the growth, and we're really looking at the same kind of programs that they are suffering through in the Eurozone right now. So that's something that Republicans would love, Wall Street would love to privatize Social Security. I mean, and that's something that we need to really face up to and look at, because it is something there, and they could do it under the cover. They can't do it now, but they could do it under the cover of the great bargain, okay? And one of the things that we're talking about is what will happen behind the fiscal cliff. So I don't want to, there's a lot to that. Kruger talks about that. He talks about that as far as how we need to look at that, and particularly as it looks at our austerity program. But to your point, I think he's going to look at, he's going to have pressure on both sides, because his treasurer, I think everybody's leaving. Well, not everybody, but a lot of his key people are
Justice
leaving.
Holders is talking about an
Justice, Clinton, of course.
Yeah, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, and new chief of staff, and et cetera. So I think, again, then we start looking at those pressures. How can he handle the different pressures that come from him, from the progressive wing, and also from that centrist wing, and from, because some people actually say that the Republicans the moderate Republicans are really going over to be Democrats.
Well, I think that I wouldn't be at all surprised if Obama has, again, at least one moderate Republican in his cabinet. He had one transportation secretary, LaHood, who I believe is leaving, has said he is leaving. So let's not forget that Obama had a Republican in his cabinet. Now, granted, the Republican Party of the last 4 years would not have recognized a LaHood. You know, he was a rhino, Republican in name only. But I wouldn't be a bit surprised if for sort of the second set, the B-level cabinet appointees, if you will, he found a moderate Republican. I would be surprised if he did that for any of the more prestigious positions, because I think Democrats would view that as a sellout. But I think you can look for a cabinet that is at least as diverse as the cabinet he has now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, looking at the names that get floated in the Washington Post and other places. It's a very diverse group. It's diverse ideologically. It's diverse demographically of these possible candidates. One of the things I think that needs to be noted here as a positive statement about Obama's first term is one of the reasons why there is this avalanche of new appointments on the horizon is because the first term was remarkably stable.
Yep.
It was the most stable, most stable term in terms of cabinet appointments we've had in recent history. So I think that says something about the coherency and the competency of the team there in the White House to keep everybody together. To go back to the fiscal cliff issue just real quickly, and the deal, I think my personal view on this is the deal ultimately is likely to be actually, in a funny way, I think the losers may be the winners on this. I think the deal is going to look a lot like what Romney was kind of hinting at in the campaign. The way to kind of, the way to kind of get revenue from the upper income earners without raising their taxes is to limit the deductions for the upper income earners. Now, this is something that Romney talked about a little bit. That might be kind of the way to let everybody save face. And I think still, I agree with you, probably at the end of the day, Obama's going to try to hold out for some additional income tax raising from the very top earners as well. But that, and I think the other thing you're probably going to see is not a gutting of Medicare and Social Security, but discussions about what the ages are for when they start, particularly for Medicare. And I think those are likely going to be the things of the grand bargain, and those are going to be things that look a lot like the Republican ideas, but they're going to have a progressive spin on them, which will satisfy the Democrats.
But keep in mind, too, that the Democrats had never really embraced deficit reduction as one of their key important things. They've been very clear. Austin Goolsbee sat down with us and said, look, is the deficit a problem? Yes. Is it the problem? No. The Republicans, on the other hand, said it is the number one issue. We saw in our exit polls on Tuesday that that the number one issue for everyone coming out of the exit polls was the economy. And the subsets of the economy, interestingly enough, were unemployment, and this surprised us. The number two subset of the economy that was an issue were higher prices. People were concerned that prices were going to go up. The deficit was on the list, but it was number four, and number four by a big margin. And so you saw today at President Obama's press conference where he basically came out and said elections have consequences, that we put tax cuts to the rich, to the voters. They made a decision. They picked us. And kind of looking at the Republicans now, get over it. He's going to try to push that hard. And he was very clear about it is not just the net of the dollars, but it's actually the tax rate that he cares about. And that may be one of the things, that may be the hill that someone's going to die on. Because he made it very, very clear that it's not just the numbers, it's the rate.
But he's got to get some traction, though, on addressing this problem. I think otherwise you go into 2016 and you are just setting the Republicans up for if they can change their brand in 4 years when it comes to immigration. You're setting them up for a perfect scenario of saying, look, we called this question in 2012 and it has not been addressed, and we have got to address it, particularly if the economy turns around.
On the subject of entitlements, Medicare and Social Security, a guy named Ron Brownstein, Washington reporter who writes for the National Journal, has talked about what he describes as a clash between the Browns and the Grays. This is a different way of thinking about the demographics that we have been talking about tonight. That Obama's coalition is largely comprises largely a younger group of voters. Voters who need investments in things like education and job training. Romney's voters are largely older people, not exclusively, but largely older whites who depend on Medicare and Social Security. Brownstein has predicted, since we are in this position where the country does not have a whole lot of loose change lying around, an increasing generational clash between those two groups, one which is largely of color and one which is largely white. Now, there are certainly young white voters and there are certainly older black Social Security and Medicare recipients. But in terms of looking at the majority of both those groups, I think he's right. And I think that is one interesting way to look at what might be coming over the next 10 to 20 years, especially because that younger group is going to need a lot of investment in things like education. Yep. To educate people well, as the educators in this audience know, we need to spend more money. It's not as if we don't know how to educate people well, but we just haven't wanted to pay for it. And so that is another way of looking at how these demographic battles may shape up in the future.
I think you want to weigh in, but I want to let everyone know that you can start coming to the microphone now with your questions. You line up right here. I think Scott is going to, if you have any questions, and I'm sure you do have questions, and I know some of our students have questions. I think some of the students have been mandated to have questions if you want that. So please, you can start lining up now. It's very interesting looking at all that is at stake as we look at this fiscal, as we look at, we've got to do something with the entitlement, several entitlement programs, got to do something about comprehensive immigration. We've got the environment. He's got all of these things at stake, cabinet positions. I'm going to go ahead since we have someone there. I do have a how free is he question to throw at you all, but I'm going to go ahead because they've got already lined up and let you ask your question. Before you ask your question, sir, and this is to everyone, there is a tremendous amount of love and great energy in this room and brilliance. And I've got love in my heart. But we're going to ask a question. We won't have a lot of statements and stuff. We're going to ask our question, and we want to direct it to our specific panelists, all right? Thank you so much.
My question is,
Come right up to that mic so everyone can hear you. Can we make sure that's on?
do you think that during this election, or actually the previous elections, do you think President Obama benefited from the lack of a third-party candidate, a libertarian, or some strong liberal candidate? Do you think he benefited from that?
Who are you asking? Which panel?
Anyone.
Yes. And specifically, anytime an incumbent candidate has had opposition within his party, they've lost. And so because he was unopposed during the primaries, he was free to marshal his resources, to gather his money, to deploy his troops in the battleground states, while the Republicans were fighting it out. You know, the Herman Cains and the Michel Bachmans and Perry and Santorum and Newt Gingrich. While they were doing that stuff, he could actually build his infrastructure. So yeah, I think he did that.
What I think he was asking about third party.
Nader effect.
Like Nader, the Nader effect, and et cetera.
Right. Earlier you said the demographics. You said young, educated young white males, or I mean just educated whites. And I was thinking, would he, would a strong libertarian would have maybe
made a difference?
Yeah,
we got a lot of interest from Gary Johnson's campaign. Rand Paul and Ron Paul's son. Ron Paul had a strong following amongst the Republicans, but most of the third-party efforts this time around were on the libertarian Republican side. There wasn't, Jill Stein ran on the Green Party.
I think we're at a different point now politically, where the political infrastructure, as it is now, doesn't lend itself to a legitimate candidate from the third party being able to challenge either candidate in the presidential election, certainly in the general. You need too much money. You need too much infrastructure. It's not there to be done right now. I think, Ross Perot was the last sort of third-party candidate, so-called third-party candidate, that many of us remember. But I think in this day and age, and I think even for the voters, voters have a very narrow threshold for political rhetoric, and they barely want to sort of plug in on the multitude of candidates that they have in front of them now. So to add a third-party candidate that sort of stretches their attention, their attention deficit disorder, basically, when you think about politics. So I don't see a third-party candidate being viable right now. At all.
Well, and then on the state level,
I'm gonna let you scoot that in.
Yeah, the Republicans and the Democrats write the rules as it relates to the state, as relates to parties and how you get on the ballot and et cetera, in all the states. So that's pretty much it.
What I'd like to do is go back and forth. Can Syracuse hear me? Syracuse, can you hear us? Will the engineer let me know?
Somebody waving.
Somebody's waving the hand?
Yeah, somebody's waving.
Great, it's good to see you. I'd like to take a question from Syracuse if we have one, and then we can go back and forth. Do we have one? Is that Hub?
That's Hub.
Can't hear.
My engineers, can we hear? Okay, Hub, if you can hear me, we cannot hear this young man. So we want to make sure we get this audio right.
Have him ask the question.
Right. Can you hear me, Hub? We can't hear. I want to make sure we get the technical stuff weeded out so that we can hear you. So we'll take another question here. But it's good to see you, Hub. How things going? Good. Okay. We'll take a question here, and then we're going to get this audio ironed out, or we not. Thank you so much, engineers. Right here.
Okay, so speaking of the new America, do you believe this is the reason why some of the states here are petitioning to secede from the United States?
And who's your question for?
Any panelists.
Nobody's going anywhere. For heaven's sake.
Thank you, young lady.
This is just
posturing.
Posturing. Thank you.
Yeah.
For the last week, serious Republicans have talked about the fact that they need to reach out, expand their tent, broaden their message so that they invite more people in. But there is always this recalcitrant group which says, to hell with that.
Right.
We want nothing to do with y'all.
Right.
And so a few of these people in Texas and other states have said they're seceding. That's not going to happen.
Right.
I think George even had
Yeah,
20,000
it's
signatures.
mostly people in the deep
Yeah,
south.
you have to have 25,000.
It worked out so well for them the last
First time,
time.
right. Right.
Do I have my students at Syracuse? Do I have audio? Just somebody shout it out and tell me, please. No? Thank you. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for this opportunity, first of all. My question is, nowadays, 4 years ago, I know that my peers and people from a similar background as mine, we were rooting for a black president, and now I see 4 years later, as we matured, my generation, we are now not looking at the race issue, but we were looking at policy and the fact and the accuracy of what they were saying in their debates and the highly active debates on Twitter. So one of my questions was, how has my generation changed this, affected this race, and how can it change the face of politics in this nation? Dr. Crockett, because I know you worked in education and London Public Schools, so, and any other panelists.
Well, a couple of things.
Thank you for your
Great question. A couple of things. One of the issues, I think, for this particular race, and I think Romney said it in his ads, he says, well, you know, we gave you a chance, and it really didn't work out, and so now let's get back to business as usual. Get this guy off the stage and get back to business as usual, and that's what his appeal. And I think that the generation now, your generation, 18 through 29, I think is that demographic, said, no, we are interested in policy as opposed to the novelty of a first president. And what we're hearing from the Republicans are policies that we cannot agree to. Your generation is more tolerant gay marriage. Your generation is more tolerant of the same-sex, one more, what's the other issue? I can't think of it right now, but it's a more tolerant generation. And and women's, yeah, same-sex and women's issues. The whole rape and, you know, Atkins and their whole, so I think your generation spoke to policy. And I think that's one of the issues that Romney came out with 60% of the 18 to 29.
Could I follow that quickly?
Sure.
Because one of the things that troubles me a little bit about the demographic discussion, not that anything you heard tonight is incorrect, but when we focus on that, it sounds as if people are simply voting in big ethnic blocks just because. People vote their self-interest.
Right.
And young voters are more tolerant. I think that is one of the reasons many of them are Obama supporters. Obama specifically talked about making college more affordable. I think that was an attractive issue for many younger voters. Many young voters, young adults, were interested in health care. And so I think that they did make their decisions on policy, as most voters did.
But at the same time, the young vote, while it did uptick this time, for the last 3 or 4 elections, the young vote has been somewhere around 16 to 17%. It ticked up a little in 08. It was 18% this time. That's about the same as the 65-plus vote, as a percentage of the electorate. But it's growing. There is growth there, but it is, I don't want us to blow it out of proportion, that it's not a gargantuan movement, but it is moving.
Well, I want to say a couple things about that. We talked about, Professor talked about sort of where young people are on the issue, on social issues. If you look at America's shifting toward acceptance of gay marriage, for example, over the last 4 years, the numbers of support for gay marriage have shot up significantly in the last 4 years, far faster than they did in the previous 8 to 10 years. Why? The election of Obama, the bigger presence of politicians who are taking on gay marriage, but also the a larger number of young people entering the electorate and becoming part of those samples in those polls. And so they are starting to shift opinion, because if you look at the polling sort of body, they're skewing younger and younger because, you know, they're starting to come of age and they're starting to become more politically active. So I think they are starting to influence the elections nationally. I think also they're going to start even more influencing the style and the manner by which politicians actually politic, by which they campaign. Younger people want more direct talk. They want more focus on policy, not style. Young people aren't watching those debates and figuring out who to vote for. Young people are sick of sort of the histrionics of the debate procedures, the performance art, as you will. And make no mistake, national politics is about performance art.
Yeah.
They want
really
issues.
bad performance art.
Right, sometimes really bad performance art. So there's not much art in it. But also they want you to talk directly to them. They want you to go out and find them. They're very much a show me type of group. And what's unique about Obama's campaign is that that's actually how they campaigned. They went right to them. And of course, let's not, you know, the thing we're not talking about is social media. Angela talked about sort of the conservative entertainment industrial complex. Well, we have social media and now we have MSNBC. So between those two sort of platforms, it gives young people a whole new place where they can be heard, where they can exchange ideas, where they can mobilize each other behind policies. That's what the whole We Are the 99% was about. It was about organizing around policies and not being enamored of a particular candidate. And so when we think about young people going forward, you're going to see the next national politician who becomes a star, the next national politician who runs and probably and wins the presidency, will have to reconcile that. Will have to understand that the way their campaigns are traditionally built, which is not to go and find new voters and not to go and actually reinvent the wheel, but to go after the voters who are habitual, they're going to have to shift. And one thing I'll put this out there, and our professors probably know this.
Dr. Reeher add in, and then we're going to go to Syracuse quickly.
There's research out there that shows when a person, especially when we're talking about young people, when they vote once, especially in a presidential campaign. But once you get them to vote in successive presidential campaigns, they become habitual voters. And so now you have two straight election cycles where young people came out in force. They now likely are habitual voters.
Once you get them in, you've got them.
You've got them locked.
Dr. Reeher, I'm going to let you weigh in briefly, and then I think I have Syracuse, so stand by.
Two quick things. One on the social issues and the gay marriage issues. The polling also suggests, however, that it's not just young people changing this, it's that older people are changing their minds about this, and that's important too.
Often as a result of the young people, because those young people are their children.
Right. But also I think having contact with people, and again, having contact matters. But I just want to say one thing quickly. Your comment does, I think, though, reveal something very important, and again, I want to go back to this, in my mind, very hopeful about race and politics in America and where we are right now with it. Because you're saying in 2008 you were about one thing, now you're looking at this in a different way and you're evaluating things differently. Let's just do a thought experiment for a moment here. You have just had a president that has been reelected with the highest unemployment rate since Franklin Roosevelt. So let's go back 12 years and say that just happened. That incumbent president was African American, and you were able to have a reelection of that. I'm sorry, I don't want to get too personal about this. I'm 52 years old. When I was in my 40s, I never thought I would see an African American elected president, and then to have the kind of hurdles on paper that this person had to deal with to get reelected. I think that says volumes about people making these evaluations about looking at two candidates, looking at the case that's being made, evaluating the case. Look, Bill Clinton's case and Barack Obama's case was, we got in a bad hand in 2008. It was a really bad hand, and we played it as best we could. That is a tough argument to make.
Yeah,
You're right.
politically.
Syracuse, question. Do I have you? Thank you so much for your question, and we're going to also encourage excellent points also for our panelists to be as brief as they can so we can get into the questions.
Sorry.
You got it.
It's on?
Yay.
Hi, good. We got you. Yay.
Start over.
And thankfully, where I'm from is okay, but I know a lot of people who weren't, and to see, like the intro video you showed at the beginning, to see Governor Christie and President Obama, almost hand in hand, almost playing on each other, bipartisanship. How important do you think that was in Obama's reelection?
How important that particular incident about
storm.
The Storm Sandy. Thank you so much for your question. Storm Sandy.
I think more than anything, it stopped.
Yeah, he saw it. You're getting it. Go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, it was a tragedy for my family's in New Jersey, and their home had 3.5 feet of water in the basement, in the first floor. Folks in Far Rockaways in New York and Long Island. A tragedy for them, but of course we're political junkies, so we look at the politics. For politically, it stopped Romney's momentum. Right. Stopped him cold. While the president was out there looking presidential, touring the sites, sitting at FEMA, calling the emergency meetings, dispatching the relief efforts there, meeting with Chris Christie and others. Romney was sort of working around the fringes. He did that. It wasn't a fundraiser. He said, "Bring your shirts, your canned goods." Right. Except he didn't check with the Red Cross, who doesn't really want that stuff.
Right.
That's right. And so it stopped him cold. Yeah. With that, at the end of the day, would have that had mattered to professors' analysis that it was already a done deal? Who knows? But it was a little extra something that allowed the president to look presidential.
I want to go back to Syracuse and let them get a second question in. If we have one, do we have one, Hub?
Yes, we do have.
Right. And then we'll come to you, sir. Thank you. How does the Republican Party need to change for the next election? Is that the question? Pray tell.
That one.
Well, Cynthia's started it. It's not just the branding is one thing, but it's they have to do an inventory of where they are on certain issues. They have to, I think, there are all these internal fights that have begun. There's this notion, for example, that sort of conservative Republicans and the evangelical movement within the Republican Party is effectively dead. But the truth is, they actually came out in higher numbers this year than they did 4 years ago. Okay, so they're not exactly extinct, but they need to decide where they are on the issues. And I think, we saw this some years ago from certain states that, the politician who comes out and actually talks about solving problems is the politician who has a better shot of getting people. So, the Republican Party has to come up with ideas, for starters. They used to be the party of ideas. They did not come out with any innovative or any sort of gristy, bread and butter, solving problems issues for people to think about. It was all about making this a referendum on Obama. And tactic is a tactic, but they have to start with their issues, and they have to decide whether or not they're going to shift on certain issues, or whether or not they can actually, change that conservative message to sort of make a more compassionate argument about why conservatism is big. But the other part of it is, they have to have a compelling candidate. They haven't had a compelling candidate in some time. And their problem also is a talent problem. Will Rubio be that guy? We'll see, but I think it starts with the issues, but they have to actually have a candidate who actually looks like America, who has views that can, views and skills and talents in that performance art that can draw people, and they haven't had it in years.
Thank you. I'm going to let you ask your question, but to also answer that from a Republican quote, Michael Steele, who was the former RNC chair to my brother at Syracuse, said that this election, to answer, to dovetail with you, Corey, it's not a rejection of conservatism, but a rejection of how conservatives presented the facts. He went on to say it's not enough to say we want everyone in the party to highlight a few people of color in the party. It's that we've got to have the policies of inclusiveness to reflect that as well. So just wanted to add that on from the Republican. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, I also am a Syracuse alum, and so we'll make it a three-peat here, go 3 questions in a row from Syracuse. And as a Newhouse alum as well, I will expand the first Syracuse student's question about Storm Sandy and Governor Christie to a broader conversation for the whole panel about all of some of the seminal moments in the campaign, the debate performances, the 47% comment, the comments by the Republican comments about rape. How did those things influence the campaign? Even specifically, if Obama had come out and lost the second debate, how do you think that would have impacted the race?
Thank you.
I am waiting for the political scientist who will write the books answering some of those questions later, because I think some of our assumptions about what matters may be wrong. I am not certain, for example, the pundits, the commentariat class, as I refer to us, all decided that if you remember, the national polls began to narrow dramatically after the first debate, or seemed to after the first debate. And the commentariat all said Obama lost badly, and that's why the polls are narrowing. I'm not sure that is what happened. I will say this. I think it is absolutely clear that there were some Senate races that were lost by bad candidates saying dumb things. Claire McCaskill in Missouri was not expected to win re-election. Indiana went for Mitt Romney. It should have had a Republican senator elected and did not. So in those 2 cases, I'm pretty sure, and there was a third member of what some pundits were calling the rape caucus. I can't remember who. Another person Murdoch was Indiana. Atkins in Missouri, and there was a third person, I can't remember who. Aiken. Thank you, I'm sorry. And in those cases, I think those races were absolutely affected by really, really dumb things that they said.
I think.
But the poll.
Quickly, and then I'm going to move on.
Well, Cynthia is absolutely right on the Senate and the House level. I actually do think that first debate made a difference. We watched at CNN the poll numbers through the summer, coming out of April when Romney secured it, going to the summer. The Democrats made a strategic decision in the summer about spending a lot of money defining Romney as a candidate. And they said, and they went to their president and said, look, we're going to drop a lot of this money now. We may not have enough money in October, November for our ground game, but we think it's worth spending now to redefine, his strength as a businessman and turn it into a weakness. So they made a bet there. We started to see the poll numbers tick up. The first, the conventions, it's really spiked. And we saw a spike. It hung out at 47%. It spiked again, and it was really high. The day after the first debate, it dropped down to pre-convention levels, and stood that way until after the third debate and the elections, the campaign started picking up again. We saw that that for good or for bad, Obama's first debate performance erased millions of dollars of money that the Democrats spent to redefine Romney's candidacy. That evaporated after that first debate. So I actually think that first debate did matter.
I think,
Quickly,
just real quick,
then we're going to go back out to Syracuse.
Okay, I think the performance art piece comes in with the debates, but I think the 47% was unrecoverable. He could not come back from that, and I think that was one of the most important issues that you mentioned, and I think that was the most important one. Romney, he suffered from that. That was a more philosophical issue. It really dealt with the majority of folks in the demographics that we've been talking about, and I think that issue was an issue that really was an issue that we will point to the future writers of the
Of the history
election
of
point
when
of
you
view.
all
Yes.
get together. Right. Thank you so very much. Hub, we'll take a question, and then I'll come to you, sir. Hub?
Okay, we have another question from Syracuse. Go ahead.
No, please repeat.
Question was, how significant, we talked about ethnic voting blocks, how significant was the women's vote here, especially when you consider things like birth control and abortion as issues?
Off the top of my head, I would say in one answer, huge.
Huge.
Who wants to weigh in on that one quickly, briefly?
Well, I'll weigh in on it by way of connecting to something Corey said before about what the Republicans need to do, because I think this is it's the same answer. The other thing that Republicans need to do is they've got to have a candidate that will have a conversation with his or her party in the same way that Bill Clinton had a conversation with his party years ago. And part of that conversation is going to be precisely on these issues. So there's got to be a conversation between a leading candidate who's willing to take on his or her own party in the primary stage and say, we need to think differently about these kinds of things. The gender gap is huge. These other gaps are huge. And it's not just with these two candidates. I mean, this is not the women's issue per se, but it connects back to the social issue. You saw a lot of referendums that had very interesting results this time. For the first time ever, people in states approved gay marriage. That's the first time that had been done by the public. So there is a sea change going on some of these issues, no question about it.
Question right here.
I'm glad to be here myself. I want to say, as President Obama or Mitt Romney, whichever one it is, we have a lot of agendas and things. How can President Obama bring together the two parties, and what time frame you think he could be able to bring them into focus?
Oh, thank you for your question, sir. And yeah, no one wants to do the time frame question, right?
Time frame's going to be a hard one.
Silence.
There is still a great deal of vehemence out there.
Yeah, it was still a divide.
Focus toward him. Part of it was the surprise that a lot of the Republicans had after Tuesday. But there's also a struggle for leadership on the Republican side. Is the Republican Party going to be led by the Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Roger Ailes wing of the party, or the Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio side, or Chris Christie, or Rick Santorum? Where is the voice? Because they're sort of headless right now. There's not a leadership that has emerged. Conservative media has largely failed their audience. They've been so effective in creating the bubble that inside that bubble, other facts couldn't penetrate, and it will come back to haunt them. But who's going to lead? Who's going to be the leadership, the voice of the Republican Party? And that will determine where, if any, moderation comes, and where, if any, coming together comes.
And don't you think they have a lot more to lose this time than they did in the first 4 years by just saying no? I mean, I think the Republicans have a lot more to lose this time looking at the 2016.
I know, Scott, you're over there waving, and a wrap, but I'm going to take these other two. I'm going to go back out to Syracuse and take this one, and it'll be all good, okay? Is that okay? Thank you so much. Let's go back out here and take that question, and then you'll be next. Syracuse? I'll take a question.
Okay, we do have a question. Hold on a second. Stand up.
We have paid for this transmission. We're going to take this.
Ronald Reagan.
Say it again. Hub, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question again for us.
I'll go ahead and repeat that.
Thank you.
Angela. The question was, is there a danger in the way the conversation about race has happened that we may begin starting to treat different racial groups like red and blue states? And what danger for the body politic is that?
How dangerous is that, Dr. Crockett?
Great question.
Thank
I think you have to look at the fact that race has been an issue with elections for quite some time. So this is not a new discussion. When we look at race and elections, we go all the way back to 1944, Smith v. Allwright, when Thurgood Marshall said that was the most important. He thought that was more important when they declared the white primary illegal. He thought that was the most important legal victory, even more important than Brown. And from that point forward, we start looking at race, because now you're talking about the lack of suppression of the of African Americans. So race has always been part of our discussion, and we look at it particularly in the presidential elections. And another thing, I have to say this, especially with Dr. C.T. Vivian here, and we haven't discussed it, but voter suppression, voter rights. This particular, you mentioned it a little bit about all of the states that have passed ID laws from 2010 till now, I think 19 states. And not Christie, but Scott down in Florida saying there's 180,000 non-citizens on the poll, on the voting books, and they ended up being 198. There's, in all of this, the attempts to suppress the vote, one of our issues that we have to look at each election is how we are not, citizens are not getting the opportunity to vote, and that's one of the tenets of our democracy. And at this particular time, it was a shame how many, the billboards and all the things that they tried to do to suppress the vote. So I think that's something that we have to address too, not at this time, but another book.
Sir. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Webb with the Journalism and Sports program here at Morehouse, and I wanted to thank you guys for all coming. But earlier, Dr. Crockett, you spoke about President Obama having mastered social media during the campaign, and I've always perceived it as, a strong avenue for feedback, but I guess I wanted to, all the panelists to expound upon its strength as a campaign platform and its impact on this election.
I'll give a quick
that's Corey.
I'll give you a quick example.
On
a campaign trail.
That briefly, because we have 2 more.
Sure. On the campaign trail, you have reporters who are with the presidential candidate, either side. They're listening to them say something. The candidate says something that's provocative or maybe off message, or they get kind of hit with it. The reporter quickly blogs it or tweets it at the same time. And so what happens is, it used to be that would happen, it would be in the paper the next day or on the news, the television news, and the campaign would regroup that night, figure out a new kind of message and tweak it a little bit, and the next day you'd see them sort of shifting away or cleaning up that point. Well, now it's happening in real time. So that reporter blogs it, tweets it, and then the next thing you know, the very next campaign stop that candidate has in that same day, and all his surrogates actually change the message right there on the spot, they clean it up, and they're good to go theoretically. So the idea is social media actually speeds up the process by which the public gets information, but also allows the campaign to actually clean up themselves and actually use social media almost as market research. So whatever is happening, they sit there and they monitor social media. Whatever bubbles up from people like you, from regular folks, in reaction to something that just happened, that campaign is on it immediately. They will incorporate it into their message in real time.
And the key to that is the campaigns, those folks who are doing it are you.
Yeah.
They're your age.
Yep.
I went into the whitehouse.gov offices that do their website, and it's 25, 26 years old.
That's right.
Scary
folks
sometimes.
in Chicago, at Obama's headquarters, are folks just like you who aren't observing social media, they're in it, they're living it. It's part of the conversation. And so there's some authenticity there.
Thank you so much. We're going to take one last question, and that question is going to come from Syracuse. Let's see what is there. If we have one last question, Hub? Yes, sir.
One of the things we haven't mentioned this evening is the fact that Obama has pledged to more or less stay out on the campaign trail. He has talked about mobilizing voters to push for the policies he wants. He was pretty insulated in his first 4 years. You know, he got elected and then he sort of disappeared into the White House. I think he has figured out that one of the things he needs to do is bring the persuasive powers of American voters to bear on issues as they come up. He figures he will go out and conduct rallies, and then maybe you will call your members of Congress or Senate and say, get with the program. So I think that that's one thing that you will see him do differently than the last 4 years.
Scott, do I have 30 seconds? Yeah, sure. Thank you, shit, like he's going to say no. Go ahead. Stand quickly and one quick answer. Thank you.
Okay, my question is for anyone on the panel. Mr. Dade had mentioned about the 30 GOP governorships and the 25 GOP state legislators. I want to know, what issues do you think we will see during Obama's second term that they will focus on, like the voter ID thing that they did before? Any idea how they will probably conduct themselves on what particular issues to maybe undercut whatever happens comes out of Washington?
I think you'll see more of the same. The voter ID, voter ID, folks, is not dead.
Right.
It just got, a TKO for this round, for this particular fight. There will be a rematch. Many of these laws weren't defeated outright. They were decisions by judges that said they cannot be implemented for this election. There's not enough time. In Pennsylvania, South Carolina, other states, these laws will be in effect for the next election cycle. Not just nationally, but locally, statewide, et cetera. So they're not going away. I think you'll see, you have several more voter ID laws that have been passed by the legislatures but are still being litigated in court. You have several other states where they will go into enactment, or go into being effective in 2014. I think you'll continue to see legislation that will attempt to roll back women's access to abortions and go after providers. I think you'll also see more states actually passing laws, and we saw some state referendums, states passing laws that actually prevent the state from enacting different parts of Obamacare, like the exchanges that states are supposed to set up. That will be one of the biggest frontiers where this sort of GOP controlling power on the state level will manifest itself, on Obamacare especially.
Right here in Georgia.
Right here in Georgia.
The governor has said that, he's not interested.
Yeah, but the thing with exchanges is that if the exchanges don't set them up,
The
the federal
feds
will.
Right. States' rights.
I want to say this, it's a great segue for us to thank and to end. So you're saying he's going out encouraging people to contact their congressmen and senators. It's not over. Just because this happened, it's not over. It's really never over. President Obama said it on his election night speech. He said the role of the citizen does not end with your vote. It doesn't end. All of this helps. We take this out. We continue the work. First and foremost, let's thank these brilliant people up here for their time. We thank you so very much. Syracuse, we thank you so much. I love you. I'm so glad it's warm here and you got the cold. Always remember, beat Georgetown. Way to go, SU, Big Orange. Once again, we want to thank Morehouse College and everyone. Ron is going to come back to do some closing statements. It's been an honor for us to do this. We hope you've all been encouraged and can take a conversation forward. And for being here, we thank you so very much to all of the powers that be that made this happen. Ron is standing by to close us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stay right here. Thank you. Stay right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the audience. Without the audience, we're just here talking among each other. We're just sitting around having lunch maybe. But with you here, you've really brought great ideas, and you can feel the interest that you brought to this program. So I really appreciate your presence today. I know you had a lot of options of other ways to spend your time. I also want to thank the Syracuse students. They are our cyber audience. And I think it was wonderful that they participated in this and that we have the, there you go.
And I think it's wonderful that we have the technology these days that we could have them fully involved. So that's a great thing about the era that we live in now. I also want to extend my thanks again to the people from Syracuse who helped put this on, and all of the staff people here at Morehouse who also helped put this program on. And I just want to point out one thing that I was thinking about. When I first met with Lorraine Branham and we decided to put this program on, after that I talked to some of my friends and told them what we were going to do. And a couple of them said, well, why are you doing this? Because it's going to be 8 days after the election, and everything that could be said about the election, will have been said already by all the commentators and all the programs. But I think if you listen closely today, I know as someone who considers myself somewhat a politics wonk, I learned so many new things. I heard so many new ideas. I got so many insights that I have not heard from anyone on the left, on the right, or on the center, that I think we really have to compliment every one of these panelists for bringing us some great ideas and things for us to ponder in the future about the future. So let's give them another hand. We have a policy here that we always want a panelist here to leave with something that will remind them of Morehouse, and we know that Syracuse is the same way. So I'd like to have our gift bags brought out by Scott and by Thomas. We've got gift we have gift bags for each panelist from both of our schools. So this is Thomas Scott, one of our journalism students.
We have SU gifts too.
Thank you.
Yes, we have SU gifts too. Scott Caldwell is bringing out SU gifts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Do I get a gift?
Oh,
dang.
space.
Make
Have
it
flight.
right.
All right.
I thought since I was from Syracuse.
So,
You wouldn't get
Syracuse.
Wow. You might actually have all this stuff already.
Oh, they call it cues.
The Q's, yeah.
Q's.
Although Dr. Crockett wanted to know what it said. I said, we call it the Q's. He wanted to. Oh, I get a Q's too? I don't have one of these bags.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
So we, the audience, will go away with a lot of thoughts and things to ponder in the future, and you go away with our fond regards for what you've contributed to us and some tangible things to have on your hands and put on your mantles and read in the future to remind you of this very special night. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you again. And you all can just drop your mic. Cool.
So you don't think
Yes.
pushing that voter stuff will sort of
So they just take pictures of
bite
it.
them in the butt? You know, that